The laughter started before Commander Ethan Cole even finished crossing the arena floor. It rippled through 50,000 alien spectators like a wave breaking over stone. Deep, rolling, contemptuous laughter. The kind that does not need translation across species or language barriers, because ridicule is the one universal dialect. Warlord Ketharak of the Vorath Dominion laughed loudest of all. He stood on the elevated command platform above the arena floor. 9 feet of layered muscle and rage encased in Vorath combat armor the color of dried blood. The armor alone weighed more than Ethan's entire body. It had been forged from the crushed hulls of 17 warships. Every joint was reinforced with alloy that could withstand a direct plasma strike. His gauntlets alone could crush a battle tank. He looked down at the small human man walking toward him and laughed until his massive chest shook. "This," he announced, his voice amplified across the entire conclave arena, "is humanity's champion?" More laughter. Nobles from 40 civilizations leaned forward in their viewing boxes. Generals and admirals who had spent decades fearing the growing reach of the Terran Confederacy suddenly felt their anxiety dissolving into something more comfortable. Something easier: contempt. Ethan Cole was 5 feet 7 inches tall. He weighed 142 pounds. He wore no armor. He carried no weapon. His dark skin caught the amber light of the arena's twin suns, and he walked at exactly the same pace he always walked, steady, unhurried, with his hands loose at his sides and his expression so calm it bordered on boredom. He stopped at the center of the arena and waited. Ketharak descended the platform steps, each footfall shaking the ground. The crowd fell quiet enough to hear the hiss of his armor's hydraulic joints. He circled him slowly, theatrically, performing for the thousands watching from above. "I expected a soldier," he said. "They sent me a child." "You requested humanity's best," Ethan said. "I'm here." That drew a fresh wave of laughter from the crowd. Ketharak stopped circling. He lowered his enormous helmeted head until he was level with his face, close enough that the heat from his armor's exhaust vents warmed his skin. "You are aware," he said quietly, almost gently, "that I have crushed the skulls of beings 3 times your size?" "You have," Ethan said. "I read your file on the way here." A pause. Then he straightened and turned back to the crowd, his arms spread wide. "He read my fiale." He roared it, milking the moment. How thorough, how very human. Always studying, always thinking, always calculating. He brought his gauntlets together with a sound like a clap of thunder, as though any of that will matter in the next 30 seconds. The crowd was delirious. Soldiers were on their feet. Nobles raised their cups. Ethan said nothing. He was counting. This had begun 8 days ago in a conference room aboard the diplomatic station Threshold 7, where 3 Terran admirals and a council representative had sat across a table from Ethan and told him that the Vorath Dominion had formally issued the right of singular challenge. "They want to skip the war," Admiral Chen had said, his voice flat with the kind of exhaustion that comes from too many impossible decisions. "Ketharak is proposing that instead of a full engagement, we settle the territorial dispute over the Corridor Nebula with a single combat. Between their champion and ours," Ethan had said. "Between Ketharak himself and our champion. He insists on facing whoever we send personally." Admiral Chen had paused. "He's done this 4 times before, against 4 different civilizations. He's never lost. The Pelhari sent their finest warrior. The Drovanic Collective sent 3. Ketharak killed all of them." Ethan had looked at the holographic display of Ketharak's combat record. The numbers were not encouraging. "What happens if we decline the challenge?" he had asked. "They invade the Corridor Nebula with their full fleet. 40 million colonists. No warning, no mercy." He had closed the holographic display. "Who else have we considered?" "You're not our first choice," the council representative had said, with the particular brand of diplomatic honesty that Ethan had always found refreshing. "Colonel Marsh declined. Major Vasquez is recovering from the Kepler station engagement. General Obi is needed on the frontier. We went through 47 names and landed on me." "You're the only one who has actually read everything we have on Ketharak," Admiral Chen had said. "Every report, every battle record, every intelligence briefing. You requested files we didn't even know we had. And you're the only candidate who asked for no weapons and no armor." Silence had settled over the conference room. "I have one question," Ethan had said. "Do we have confirmation on what's inside his armor?" The 3 admirals had exchanged a look that told him everything. They knew something. They had decided not to tell him. And now he was asking anyway. Admiral Chen had reached across the table and placed a single data chip in front of him. "Everything we know," he had said, "which isn't much, but it might be enough." He had read that file for 6 hours straight on the transport to the conclave. By the time he had arrived, he had read it 3 more times. Cathartic swung at him. It was not a measured strike. It was not a test. He brought his full armored fist toward him with the kind of casual, theatrical brutality that communicates absolute certainty of outcome. A performance blow. A finishing the sentence blow. Ethan stepped inside it. Not away from it. Not backward. He stepped toward him, into the arc of the swing, and the massive gauntlet passed so close to his ear that he felt the displaced air. His elbow came up and connected with the inner joint of his arm, precisely where 2 armor plates overlapped, and the impact traveled through the gap in the composite material and hit the pressure nerve cluster just above his wrist. His fingers spasmed open. Just for a half second, the crowd had no idea what had happened. They saw him step close, something blur, and then Cathartic recover and shove him with the flat of his hand. The shove launched him backward 15 feet across the arena floor. He hit the ground, rolled, and came up standing. More laughter, but uncertain now. Cathartic looked at his gauntlet. His fingers had opened without his permission. He closed them deliberately, slowly, and rolled his massive shoulder. Clever, he said, and now his voice was not quite as theatrical. You know pressure points. I know quite a lot of things, Ethan said. Let's see how many of them survive the next few minutes. He came at him differently this time. Lower, faster. The kind of movement that should not have been possible for something his size in that armor, but the Vorath were not simply large. They were fast in the way that certain apex predators are fast, with a suddenness that seems to violate physics, a lurch from stillness to full speed that left no reaction time, except Ethan had watched every recorded fight in his file. 47 matches. He knew the lurch. He knew the tell. A quarter second before he moved, his left shoulder dropped by 2 degrees. He dropped under his rush, hit the ground flat, and came back up behind him. He's small, Ethan heard a voice from above say, a noble in one of the viewing boxes. But he moves like something scared, another voice answered. He was not scared, he was calculating. The first plot twist arrived at the 7-minute mark. Cathartic caught him, not a glancing blow. His hand closed around his forearm, and he felt the armored grip locked down like a steel vise, and he lifted him completely off the ground with one arm and turned to display him to the crowd. You see, he announced. The human struggles, the human writhes, so small, so fragile. Ethan did not struggle. He did not writhe. He placed his free hand on the bracer covering his forearm and began to pull. The crowd laughed. He appeared to be trying to pry his hand open, an insect pushing at a mountain, a child trying to move a wall. Cathartic laughed too. He squeezed harder. There was a sound, not the crack of bones, which was what the crowd expected. A different sound, a lower sound. A sound like a deep structural groan, like metal beginning to protest forces it was not designed to withstand. The laughter tapered off. Cathartic felt it first. A pressure against his bracer, not the frantic pull of someone trying to escape, something methodical, something that was working against the locking mechanism of his armor's gauntlet with knowledge of exactly how that mechanism functioned. His grip failed. He released him involuntarily, his fingers opening again, and Ethan landed on his feet and stepped back, and there was a deep quiet spreading through the arena, and 50,000 beings were leaning forward. What, said one of the Vorath generals in the viewing box, was that? Cathartic looked at his gauntlet. A section of the locking mechanism had been forcibly bent outward. By his hand. He looked at him. That armor, Ethan said, has 43 potential structural failure points. I've found 6 of them in the last 7 minutes. The silence was absolute. Catharic's next move was not theatrical. It was not a performance. He came at him with the speed of genuine anger, and for the first time in the match the crowd could see that the small human man was actually, seriously, in mortal danger. What followed was 4 minutes of the most terrifying combat the Conclave Arena had witnessed in 3 decades. Cathartic was not simply strong. He was a genius of physical combat, trained from birth, hardened by centuries of Vorath military culture that considered pain a classroom and survival a credential. He had fought armored opponents and unarmored opponents, massive opponents and small ones. He had fought in vacuum, underwater, in zero-G environments, on the surfaces of asteroids. He had never fought anything like Ethan Cole. He moved around him in a language of geometry. Every position he took was precise, not random evasion, not panic. Every step was calculated to place him at specific angles relative to his armor, his reach, his mass, and the known structural weak points of Vorath combat plate. He was not avoiding him, he was mapping him. When he struck, he deflected rather than blocked, using the momentum of his blows to redirect himself. arriving at new positions that happened to be exactly adjacent to the next joint he wanted to test. When he grabbed, he let the grab happen until the last possible moment, extracting information from the grip before slipping free. The crowd had gone very quiet. In the diplomatic viewing box, the representative from the Pelhari stood up slowly, and an ancient expression crossed her alien face that might have been recognition, might have been awe. "He's not fighting him," the Pelhari representative said quietly. The Dravanic ambassador turned. "What? He's studying him. He's been studying him this entire time." The Pelhari representative sat down heavily. "We sent our finest warrior to fight Catharak. We should have sent a scientist." The second plot twist arrived when Catharak did something he had never done in 47 matches. He stopped. He stood in the center of the arena with his arms at his sides, and he looked at him, and the crowd watched him look at him. And there was something on the Warlord's face that none of his generals had ever seen there before. "Doubt. Who are you?" he said. Not theatrically, not for the crowd. "Just a question." "Commander Ethan Cole," he said. "Terran Confederacy. Special Operations. How are you doing this?" "I told you. I read your file." "Nobody reads a file and does this." "Most people don't read files at all," he said. "That's the difference." He charged again, and this time the charge was different because the performance was gone, and what was left was something rawer and more dangerous. He was not trying to impress anyone. He was trying to end this. He almost succeeded. His hand caught his shoulder and slammed him into the arena wall with enough force to crack the composite surface. He hit it and stayed upright, barely, and for the first time he allowed himself a controlled moment of pain, a breath, a recognition that his left shoulder was going to be a problem. He had 3 structural failure points left to reach. He needed one. The third plot twist was something that had not appeared in any file. Catharak stopped again. His breathing had changed. Inside the arena, the air carried the faint, sharp smell of something overheating, and 3 of the Vorath engineers in the viewing box stood up at the same time, looking at readouts on their handheld scanners, and the looks on their faces were not good. Ethan noticed. He was designed to notice things. He had known about the armor's thermal management system from the file. He had known it was not a weakness, exactly, more of a condition. Under sustained maximum output combat, the Vorath Mark IX combat plate generated heat faster than its cooling systems could dissipate it. It was not a flaw. Under normal conditions, no fight lasted long enough for it to matter. He had been keeping him at maximum output for 11 minutes. He watched the engineers talking urgently to each other. He watched Catharak's movements becoming fractionally stiffer. The cooling failure would not damage him directly. What it would do was lock up the microhydraulics that assisted the armor's weight distribution, making it progressively heavier, less responsive, a prison instead of a weapon. He needed to reach the primary locking mechanism on the back plate. To do that, he needed to get behind him. To get behind him, he needed him to come at him fast and commit. He stopped moving. He stood still and looked at him. "You're overheating," he said. Every Vorath engineer in the arena stopped talking. Catharak's head turned toward the engineering box. A fraction of a second. Less. Ethan moved. The ending was not what the crowd expected. They had expected a long, brutal finale. They had expected him to be destroyed, eventually, because destruction was the logical outcome. Small, fragile human against the most feared warlord in the known galaxy. What they got instead was 10 seconds. He was behind him before anyone fully processed the movement, and his hands found the main structural connector of the back plate, the primary anchor where the torso armor locked to the hip assembly, a point he had been calculating the approach to for the last 12 minutes. Catharak spun. His elbow came back. He absorbed the hit and held on. What came next was a sound. No one who was in the conclave arena that day ever forgot the sound. It was not the sound of breaking metal, exactly. It was bigger than that. Deeper. It was the sound of something that was never meant to come apart, being separated from itself by a force that had no business existing in a body that size. The armor's back plate separated. Then the side panels, because the failure cascade did the rest. The locking failures he had been quietly introducing for 12 minutes propagated instantly through the compromised system, and the entire outer shell of Catharak's legendary, myth-grade, warship-forged combat armor came apart. The pieces hit the arena floor. The crowd made a sound that was not quite noise, more like the physical expression of collective shock. A whole civilization's worth of assumptions shattering simultaneously and producing something that had no name. Catharak stood there, without his armor. And that was when the galaxy understood. The intelligence files had hinted at it. The data was incomplete, fragmentary, gathered from debris fields and the one Vorath prisoner who had spoken before going silent. Ethan had studied it for 6 hours and built a theory. He had not been certain. He was certain now. Ketharak without his armor was not a towering physical specimen. He was not the apex of natural evolution. He was not the product of superior genetics or ancient warrior breeding. He was, in biological terms, smaller than Ethan. The Vorath were not large creatures. They were approximately 4 feet tall, with soft, pale bodies that had evolved on a low-gravity world under a dim sun. Their bones were light. Their muscles were efficient but not powerful. Ketharak the Warlord, legendary crusher of skulls, was a 4-foot pale being with enormous dark eyes and 4 delicate arms currently crossing themselves over his chest in an instinctive protective gesture. The armor had not been a combat enhancement, it had been everything. 50,000 beings stared down at the thing they had feared, not feared, worshipped. The Vorath Dominion had held the galaxy's respect through 30 years of territorial expansion, backed by the reputation of a warlord who could not be stopped, an armored colossus who had crushed 5 civilizations. Generals had surrendered fleets rather than face him. Planets had offered tribute rather than risk his attention. They had not been surrendering to Ketharak. They had been surrendering to the armor, and the armor was on the floor. Ketharak looked at it. He looked at Ethan. His enormous dark eyes held something that, across the vast distances of biology and civilization, was absolutely recognizable. Humiliation. Then something worse. Recognition. "You knew," he said. "I suspected," he said. "The file was incomplete. I needed confirmation. If you had failed, I had 43 points of failure and 12 minutes of preparation. I was not going to fail." One of the Vorath generals rose from the viewing box. His voice was controlled, but his hands were shaking. "This contest is," he began. "Complete," Ethan said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The arena's sound system carried him quietly to 50,000 listeners. Under the terms of the right of singular challenge, the challenger's defeat ends the contest. The Corridor Nebula remains under Terran Confederacy protection. The 40 million colonists remain under Terran protection. Those were the terms. Silence. Then, from somewhere in the diplomatic viewing boxes, a single sound began. It was not applause. Applause was too simple, too human, too familiar. It was something different. The particular sound that 50,000 beings from 40 civilizations make when they simultaneously revise a fundamental assumption about the nature of the universe. The aftermath took 3 hours. In those 3 hours, the following events occurred. A Vorath admiral formally acknowledged the outcome of the rite. Ethan accepted with the same expression he had maintained throughout the match. Calm, attentive, completely unremarkable. 11 Vorath territorial claims that had been pending for 7 years were quietly withdrawn. The Pelhari representative personally requested a diplomatic meeting with the Terran Confederacy for the following morning. The Drovanic Collective, whose 3 champions Ketharak had killed, sent a message to Terran diplomatic channels that contained only 4 words: "We wish to talk." In the Vorath engineering bay beneath the arena, 7 engineers sat with Ketharak's armor spread across examination tables and said nothing to each other for a long time. In a private meeting room adjacent to the arena floor, Ketharak sat across from Ethan with no armor, no platform, no crowd, and looked exactly like what he was. A small being from a low-gravity world who had built an empire on the galaxy's ignorance. "You're going to tell them," he said. "The information is already on its way to Terran Command," he said. "What they do with it is above my rank. The Dominion will collapse." "That's possible. 30 billion people," he said. "Vorath citizens. They have nothing to do with my decisions." Ethan looked at him for a long moment. "Then I'd suggest," he said, "that someone in the Vorath Dominion with appropriate authority contact the Terran Confederacy in the next 72 hours and begin discussing a framework for a peaceful transition of territorial claims. The information about your armor will become public eventually regardless. How the Dominion is perceived when that happens depends entirely on what the Dominion does in the next 72 hours. Ketharak stared at him. "You're offering us a choice," he said. "You won. You destroyed everything I built. You have every advantage. And you're offering us a choice. Humans generally prefer not to dismantle civilizations when there's a functional alternative," he said. "We've dismantled enough of our own. We know what it costs." A long silence settled in the room. Somewhere above them, 50,000 beings were beginning to scatter back to their ships and stations and homeworlds, carrying with them a story that would travel faster than any fleet. "I have one question," Ketharak said. Ethan waited. "How strong are you?" he asked. "Actually, what are you?" He considered the question the way he considered everything, thoroughly, from all angles. "Human," he said. "That's the whole answer." He did not look satisfied. He looked like a being who had spent 30 years constructing a very specific model of the universe, and was now holding the pieces of it in his 4 delicate hands. "Humans," he said slowly, "are supposed to be weak." "I know," he said. "That's a very old misconception. I encourage you to update your files." He stood and straightened his jacket and walked to the door. "Commander," he stopped without turning. "6 failure points," Ketharak said. "You found 6 in 7 minutes. You said you had 43 total available." "That's correct. No opponent has ever found one," he said. "In 47 matches." "I know." "How?" He looked back at him over his shoulder. "I read your file," he said. "All of them. Every report, every battle, every deposition, every piece of intelligence we had, and quite a bit we technically weren't supposed to have. I read them until I understood your armor better than your own engineers. I spent 3 weeks mapping failure points theoretically before I ever set foot in that arena." He paused. "You want to know humanity's secret, Ketharak. It isn't strength, it isn't speed, it's that we will study something until we know it better than it knows itself, and then we will walk into the arena calmly, and we will be ready, and you will look at us and see something small and fragile and easy, and by the time you realize your mistake, the armor is already on the floor." He left him sitting there. In the diplomatic channels, the story was officially recorded as Singular Combat, Conclave Arena, Threshold System. Outcome, Human Victory. Contestant, Commander Ethan Cole, Terran Confederacy. In the history books of 40 civilizations, it was recorded differently. The Pelahari called it the Unveiling. The Drovanic Collective called it the Reckoning. The Vorath Dominion, eventually, after a long and difficult period of political negotiation and territorial restructuring, called it the beginning of the Second Age. Not because they were being poetic, because it was the most accurate description. Everything before that day had been the First Age, the age when the galaxy had not truly understood what humanity was. Everything after was the Second Age, the age when they did. Ethan Cole's official report, filed 48 hours after the match, was 11 pages long and consisted almost entirely of structural analysis, diplomatic recommendations, and a request for updated intelligence files on 12 other regional powers, whose military reputations he had begun to find suspicious for similar reasons. He included one personal note at the end, which his superior Admiral Chen read 3 times. It said, "Request denied for a vacation. I have reading to do." The armor was eventually placed in a museum on the Vorath homeworld, not as a monument to their warlord, as a reminder. They built a small plaque for it, translated into 16 languages, that read simply, "The galaxy's most feared weapon, defeated by a man who read a file." Somewhere in the Terran Confederacy's records, in a quiet database that most people never accessed, was a list of 47 challenges that various civilizations had issued against humanity over 2 centuries. 47 moments when other species had looked at the small, soft, emotional creatures from the 3rd planet of an unremarkable star and decided that humanity was the easy target. The list had 47 entries. It had 47 resolutions. None of them were what anyone had expected. And at the bottom of the list, added in the standard formatting of a Terran bureaucratic entry, was number 48. Vorath Dominion. Right of Singular Challenge, Ketharak. Outcome, Human Victory. Method, Preparation. Just like all the others. Just like it always was.